In your book, Getting to Zero, you talk about this concept of returning to zero after conflict, not avoiding conflict, but knowing how to reconnect. But for men specifically, what makes this so difficult? What's the thing we're doing that keeps us stuck in this disconnection?
Yeah, well, a couple of reasons. We're in fairy tales about how relationships work. We think if we meet the right one, we don't have conflict, and that's just bullshit. Number two, we set conflict up to have two shitty choices. So if I speak up and say something, it's going to rock the boat. The person's going to leave. They're going to get upset. It's going to go badly. So I won't say anything, right? And that's choice B is like I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to make this worse. And choice B is like I don't say anything. I keep the relationship, but I betray myself. So I speak up and potentially lose the relationship, but I keep the relationship with myself. Or choice B, I don't speak up, lose myself, but keep the relationship. Those sound like two bad choices, right? So people tend to just keep avoiding. And then we're animals, we're mammals, and we hate being rejected. We hate being cast out. It's really scary to be hurt by another person. And so conflict is just straight up uncomfortable. And again, back to the resiliency thing, we don't have a lot of reps because a lot of us grew up in families that were conflict avoidant or high conflict and we want nothing to do with it anymore. And so we all label it as bad and then we don't know how to work through it. So, and we don't know how to repair. So we're just like, I'm not even going to deal. I mean, and then there's shame because I should be better at this and I'm not. And, there's layers here. But I just like to remind people it's like skiing or golf or a video game. You start out as a white belt, admit where you're at, and you learn. And then you advance in the belt system and you just apply. It's a skill anyone can learn. Communication and conflict and repair are skills anyone can learn if you apply yourself. So the empowered, excellent communicators, become excellent because they practice and train with real people in real time all the time. And maybe they study it, they learn, they read, they listen to your podcast. So I just try to remind people, look, you're normal if this is scary and hard for you. And stop using that as an excuse for the rest of your life and get in the game and learn.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the common experience of male defensiveness that is masked with this like hyper independence that feels like you can't be wrong or you can't be reliant on someone else. And that defensiveness, it sounds like what you're saying is it keeps you from learning and keeps you in this all or nothing. Either I'm doing great and I have it all together and I'm the best, or I'm a complete failure and that shame sets in. And it sounds like if a guy can humble himself and see it as a journey and development, that of course, if you've never done it, how could you be good at it? But to your point earlier about dating and reps, like you just need more and more reps. And it doesn't mean you go out of your way to have conflict, but it certainly means every time conflict presents itself, that you see it as an opportunity to grow and learn. I think what's under there that a lot of people don't name is the need to feel safe within the temporary disconnect. The person that you're with, trusting that they have your best interest. This was something I had to learn with my wife that I feel like when she gave me feedback, I thought because it feels bad, I like misinterpreted her coming from a bad place. Like, oh, she's just attacking me, judging me. And when I had to realize, oh my gosh, it's actually because she sees me, she knows me, and she loves me that she's giving me the feedback. And if she didn't have any of those things, she wouldn't give a shit. And she would shut down or avoid or just leave me. If she's willing to love me enough to stay in this thing and willfully enter into conflict, knowing that it's honestly going to cost her time, energy, and presence like me, why would I not stay here if I am committed to that person? But I'm curious in that moment, what makes it so hard to see that safety and trust that that person is often reaching out to provide?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, maybe lots of reasons. We think, again, when people get married, their vows just don't cut it in terms of operating principles and agreements and purpose for the relationship. And nowhere in people's vows usually are, we're going to like learn how to do conflict and repair really well. And so people just are winging it, right? And then they feel very threatened and unsafe when someone brings up some feelings or some uncomfortable feedback. So there's got to be a context for the relationship. So I always recommend you got to be able to talk about the relationship, talk about the context. Like, hey, is it okay here in our relationship to give each other feedback if something's challenging or not working for one of us? Can that be okay? Can we have a culture of an open door policy on feedback, on bringing hard things up, and that will also be receptive to hear the person out? We'll take it into consideration. Can we agree that that's a fundamental truth and principle in our relationship? Like, so if the context is there, it protects us from when we want to be emotional and point the finger and run. That's why people have agreements in their relationship. And so I think that can help a lot. And then in terms of just a quick comment on your defensiveness comment, I just wrote a whole newsletter on this today, actually. And we have to ask, if we're defensive, we have to ask, like, what am I defending? And usually they think a man thinks it's his position. Well, I'm defending because I'm right. And it's like, no, you're defending against feeling shame and humiliation, and your self-image is taking a hit, and that sucks for you, and you don't want to even feel that or look at that, and so you're going to defend and protect that part of yourself. That's often what's going on, and if you can get vulnerable and slow down and admit that, it's going to go way better, because a relationship will not advance in a blame defend cycle. It just won't get anywhere.
Tell me about the moment you realized just how bad you were at relationships, even though you were the relationship guy, in quotes. What about those failures humbled you or really informed you on where you were actually at?
Yeah, the first one was pre-relationship guy. So I'm, 29, and I'm breaking up with another good woman in a Whole Foods parking lot. It's felt very familiar. She's teary, and I'm looking like the asshole, and just like, man, this sucks. And I said something to the effect of, it's not you, it's me. And I'd said that before as kind of a cop out to try to look like a good guy. But this time it felt true. Maybe I was like, maybe it is me. And as we ended the relationship and I drove away, I realized it was actually me, and I was the common denominator in all these kind of breakups and failures. And if that were true, then I could do something about it. And I did. And I shortly after that went to grad school and to study myself in psychology. And yeah, there's a lot more after that, but that was a major, major turning point in my life.
I think your situation is very common for a lot of guys who are out there and trying to date, or unfortunately not trying to date, and it's not going so well. It's interesting. Part of why I started this podcast was to explore masculinity, but in a way that felt like it could give guys some sort of guidance or understanding what maturity and wholeness and health looks like versus not. And I'm wondering, we all go through these times when we realize it's not just that we have problems, but we are the problems. Can you speak to a guy out there that's wondering, when is it time for me to realize it's me and I need to do some major inventory, reflection, and change in my life instead of just, I'm a regular guy with regular problems?
Yeah, I'd say after the rule of three is good here for a pattern. If you have something that happens three times, you could call it a pattern. And if something happens three times, you might want to look in the mirror and say, what is my part in this pattern? For example, attracting an emotionally unavailable woman who's not, who keeps breaking up with you or is distant and withdrawn, or attracting an anxious woman over and over, or whatever the sort of pattern is that you shut down. A common one might be that you, during conflict, when things get a little uncomfortable, like having a hard conversation with her, you shut down and you keep shutting down. And then it's really hard to claw your way back to the conversation. That's a pattern, and that's your problem. And it's time to look at that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Reminds me of that quote. What is it? Like, insanity is doing this same thing over and over, expecting different results. And how often do we stay in these patterns that unfortunately society has deemed as normal? And something you bring up that's interesting, I'm curious if you can speak to, you mentioned essentially partnering with someone anxious or avoidant or not really healthy themselves. What are some signs a guy can look for in a woman that would be tried and true characteristics, traits that they can trust? Hey, this person is healthy, they're a viable option, and they have trustworthy potential for me to really see them as a life partner. Of course, many men's brains go right to the physical connection, but gravely overlook the emotional and cognitive and how all that shakes out. So yeah, could you just speak to that?
Yeah. First, we have to define healthy, and I would say we're all challenged in relationships. So we don't want to come to conclusions too early because a woman is anxious or avoidant, or she shuts down, or she kind of raises her voice. That's human beings under stress. We all kind of act like morons when we're really triggered and we're really upset. And so it's not really fair to characterize a woman as like, oh, she's unhealthy because she reacts, for example, or she's emotional, so therefore she's unhealthy. It's more like I like the name of your podcast, it's mature. Like, is she mature? Which means, can she come back around after a hard moment and take responsibility for her part and how she contributed to the fight or the mess or the disagreement? Can she listen to you until you feel like she cares and you feel understood? And, um, is she the kind of person who is just cares about people and cares about you and demonstrates that with her behavior? It's kind of, I always say, don't get lost in chemistry or looks or bank accounts or whatever. Really, the most important qualities in a partner are their willingness and ability to work through hard things with you. Because that's going to be the thing that makes you last. Anyone in the first year can feel great. Anyone. That's easy. There's no bragging there. Like, who cares? It's what happens after the first year, second year, third year. Then you start knowing who you're really dealing with. And if you and her can hang in there when it's hard, that's a really good sign.
You mentioned multiple years. If a guy's listening, he might get freaked out like, whoa, I won't know if this is long lasting until it's, let's say over a year. First of all, a lot of guys feel like that is a daunting investment that they're not sure on their return. But
Mhm.
more so, you know, it's the whole like, should I stay or should I go? And a lot of guys I work with in therapy, and a lot of women too. I think it's a common concept in general, right? Is like similar to the having problems versus being problems. A lot of people are in relationships and they're really asking, like, okay, yes, there's problems with this person, or sometimes we don't get along, or we don't necessarily resolve conflict most effectively, but I care about him. But then I'd have to start over. But, what if the grass isn't greener on the other side? And, if I just put forth the effort. And I find that, everyone's personality and perspectives are different. Some people are very much in denial and they just like are holding on to the one last positive or healthy component of the relationship. And then others are a little too, you said this a minute ago, too quick to count someone out. Oh, there's problems. See you later. So I'm just wondering if someone's processing the whole should I stay or should I go component within a relationship, how can they navigate that in a way that feels, helpful and effective?
I heard two questions there: the should I stay or should I go to, which I'll speak to second. And the first one is like, I kind of heard underlying in your question is like vetting a new person, because you're not going to be able to, it's 3 years later. That's a long time to, you know, be in it before you start to see their true colors. And that's true. So I think if we take the attitude that every partner we have is a training partner and a learning opportunity, and it doesn't have to be the life partner, I think people look too hard at, is this person life partner material? And if you're 25 trying to find the perfect life partner, it's just, I think you need more reps and experiences. So go date people and get in the relationship and actually like start learning and commit to the relationship. Yeah, I'm here. I'm all in. And if it gets hard in 2 years, not because of you, because you're really willing to work through conflict, you're taking responsibility for your part, but the other person starts to become impossible, you learn to move on. You go, all right, this is not actually what I'm looking for. I want a teammate, not a person who's going to blame me for everything. I'm not, that's not, doesn't, I'm into someone who's like pulls their weight 50-50 or 100-100, like, so that's what I would say to the kind of vetting process. And we want to always vet people that aren't victims, that don't blame everybody else for their problems. That you can sniff out in the first few months. And then in terms of we're in the relationship and then we're having second thoughts, the should I stay or should I go question. That's definitely a hard one. I mean, I was stuck in that for really 3 years with my wife. I broke up with her twice, and then I finally ended up committing and going all in, and we're still married and still together. So I know this one very, very intimately myself from the inside, and I coach people on this one. So it's very common for a guy to do the grass screener thing because they're guys and we're trained to like, well, it's like a woman is like a status thing. Like, well, how will my friends feel if she's hot and if she's not hot? And we get really caught in that whole nonsense. And when things do get hard, we tend to think it shouldn't be this hard, or I don't like how I'm being, I don't like how they're being. So maybe it would be easier if I found the quote right person. And I think that's when it's a slippery slope into being in magical thinking and fairy tales. I don't think there's one right person for everybody. I just think we're all training partners, and it's just like, who do you want to commit to? They're never going to be a 10 out of 10. They're going to have issues, and you're going to find out about them years in, and you're going to get annoyed. And that's okay, because you're the same way. You have issues. You're not perfect. You're flawed. You have insecurities. You have triggers. You have annoying behaviors that upset other people. So, if we accept kind of our humanity and are like, okay, I'm going for like a good enough partner, which is, I think, a really good bar to have. And that, again, the most important qualities are like interpersonal skills, the ability to like be a team under pressure, those kind of things. I think the inner qualities of how people do relationship are the most important.
Reminds me in Gottman therapy how they say you don't pick a person, you pick a set of problems. And this is similar in job stuff as well. Everyone's looking for the right fit. And the reality is that there's always going to be a less than ideal thing. But speaking of ideal, I think to your point, it's a real crisis present day. And in my estimation, because of the dating apps, people have too many options. And then essentially they freeze up because it's FOMO. It's like, well, yes, this person's good, but what if someone better comes along? And having one person like that makes it almost impossible. I would say having two people like that essentially makes it impossible. And we're seeing a lot of not just delay, but just outright non-existent budding relationships because people are just cutting each other off at the knees too early, in combination with what we talked about earlier, not having a true sense of who they are as an individual and knowing what they want. So they're going in blind. They're just thinking they deserve the world, or even if they don't deserve the world, that maybe the best ideal is out there if they just keep searching. And then it ends up keeping them in a holding pattern. Yeah, and I'm just curious what your sense of like, what's the remedy here? Like, what's going to get people out of this vicious cycle?
Yeah, I was hearing some stat by Scott Galloway recently about young men like 18 to 24 that like 45% of them have never approached a woman and asked them out, in person. I was like, what? So I do think there's especially young men, there's a bit of a crisis going on of either blaming women are scary and kind of mean and I shouldn't trust them, or I'm just scared because I don't have any reps under my belt. I'm just online all the time and I don't have any real world experience just walking up to a woman at Whole Foods and asking her out. So I think it's back to like old school dating. I think it's fine to do the dating apps, pick ones that are in your values and don't get lost boundaries around those things. But I think meeting people in real time and in person at doing your values. So if you like working out, like meeting women at the gym, or if you like hiking, joining a hiking club or going hiking a lot. So you bump into women on the trail. It's like back to just straightforward, do your life and set your intention that you want to meet someone special and partner with someone. And it's going to happen. Sitting on the couch, on your phone, in your room, in your basement, that's not helping anybody. So, and then if you're scared, then you got to go work with a coach or a therapist to work through some of your blocks, social anxiety or whatever, to get out there, right? It's just not going to happen unless you're put yourself out there. It's the same with a job. You're not going to get the job unless you go job hunting. right?
Yeah, and even that word hunting, like it requires some sort of risk and putting yourself out there. And yeah, I've heard that stat recently from Scott Galloway as well. And I think in that similar podcast where he mentions this, they were also discussing how, guys just are not going out in person and talking to anyone, any stranger. We only talk to people we already know, which unfortunately is a small group. But then, there's all these videos and posts of women who are essentially begging. They're walking around in public being like, I'm just begging a guy to ask me out. And it's such an interesting phenomenon, right? Because many guys have in their head, well, like obviously the fear of rejection, like I'm not enough, all these things. But it is crazy how it's similar to creating content online. And I don't know if you found this, but so the overwhelming majority is so consuming that if you can be one of the few that produces and gets out there and takes a risk, that you really have an incredibly high chance of success.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're putting yourself out there every day, that's right. I mean, look, people are, for whatever reason, we could kind of argue about the factors that kind of paralyze guys, especially young men. But it's a lot of like men have become a little we're either fragile because we're afraid of rejection and we've been, enabled by our mom or our culture, or we've been online stuck in video games or whatever. We're just fragile. So like we don't have real world experience, or we're hardened because we've been hurt by a woman, and then we blame all women. And now we're like listening to certain um, pundits or podcasters that kind of hate women too. And now we're going to join on that train. Like that's not going to go anywhere. So I think there's a middle path here of being upright, but available, vulnerable, but standing up tall, not collapsing, and going and meeting the world and being challenged by the world and getting stronger through rejection. Like, so what? You got rejected 100 times. Your pitch is going to get better. Your approach is going to get better. You're going to learn a lot about yourself. Rejection's a great teacher.
Wow, yeah, that's hitting home for sure with me. And, I think even just admitting that to your person, that's vulnerable. But just saying, like, hey, I hear you. I feel like I'm tempted to feel shameful and want to be defensive. And just even naming it. And I think there's a lot of release, right? Because I think if you keep it in your head, that pressure builds. Because then let's say you have that invasive thought or belief of like, well, I need to protect like what's wrong with me because I don't want her to see me as being wrong as an identity. And then it kind of builds. And the whole time she's interpreting the defensiveness as the ego, when to your point, it's actually just protecting that really delicate part of ourselves that if we were to let her into, we would actually connect over and talk through, and she could help reaffirm and speak to and normalize. And I think this is a good foundation. I'm curious if we can get into the weeds of your framework through a common scenario that I'm sure you find. So, a guy's girlfriend or wife is upset. He doesn't know why. And he's already feeling defensive, if not certainly confused. Can you talk us through what does getting to zero actually look like in that moment? What are the real time moves essentially a guy should be taking from the start of that conflict to its resolution?
Yeah, there's a lot there, but I'll try to keep it really simple because this is not a process to be overwhelmed by for any man. It's a process to just commit to learning. And again, we have to have a framework. So my girlfriend and I agree that conflict is okay. It's not the boogeyman. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It doesn't mean we're a bad fit. It just means we're having a challenge interpersonally. That's it, and our nervous systems are getting activated. So can that be okay? So we start with the context of conflict is okay. And then we have part of our context is it's okay to talk about it. We hang in there and we stay with the process until we're at zero, which to me, it means we're back to a good place and we feel connected again. That's essentially what zero is. And that's our commitment as a couple is whenever it gets hard, honey, we're committed to getting to zero, to getting to back to a good place. Do you agree? Yes. Okay. And if we can't, are we willing to get outside help from a therapist or a coach? Yes. Okay. So that means we'll kind of never be stuck. So that kind of commitment is very powerful. Then there's a process we can learn. And I have just quickly it's like we come to let's say we got into a snag, my girlfriend and I, and during the conflict, it just didn't go well. We couldn't figure it out. That's okay. That's most people. During the conflict, it's very hard to like think rationally. You're in the back part of your brain. You're not firing on all cylinders. You're kind of saying stupid stuff. You're not a great listener. So you're winning if you can do that. And so most of us aren't. So let's just say it didn't go well. And now it's been 5 minutes or an hour, and we're kind of like silent in the car. And we're just like, ugh, this is terrible. I hate how this feels. At some point, one of us has to speak or listen. Those are our two options, right? Who wants to talk first? Who wants to listen first? If we're going to talk first, we're going to lead with ownership and empathy. And my favorite sentence is, my part is blank, and I can imagine the impact on you was blank. So instead of you always, you never, I'm saying my part was that I raised my voice and I called you a name or whatever. And I can imagine that really hurt your feelings. So that's if we speak. If we listen, we just say, honey, I'd like to listen first. I really want to understand what it's like to be you with what happened an hour ago. And then the commitment I tell people to make is to LUFU your partner, which means listen until the other person feels understood. LUFU. And that's just it's an aspirational bar for you that you don't understand the person until they tell you they feel understood. And there's 4 skills within that are reflect back what you heard, validate their feelings, own your part, and empathize with the impact. That's it. And if you both can do that and do it well, you're going to have a really solid relationship for life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that's the majority of what guys need to hear. And I think it speaks to a skill that you talk about that's important, which is interpersonal intelligence, the ability to really know yourself, know the other person, and how you may want to interact. And I'm curious, what is maybe one particular practice within that whole process that a guy can practice this week that would immediately improve how he's showing up in conflict?
Yeah. So, the one of the first things you can do is, again, just commit, like your life depends on it, your relationship life depends on it, to learning how to repair. So it can be an internal quiet commitment to yourself. It can be a commitment out loud to a friend or your partner. It can be just a journal prompt, like I am 100% committed to this. Because again, if you commit to that, you're gonna succeed. So that's just like again an internal thing we can do this week. Something else we can do is we can start taking more responsibility than we ever have, and just assume that you always have a part, even if you think you don't. And if you think you don't, you can just ask the person, "What do you think my part is?" And I'm sure they'll give you some feedback. And if you're open minded, you'll be like, let me consider that. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I could see how I probably did do that. So, like, I think taking responsibility for our part, and again, I like that sentence that I suggested earlier, because if we include empathy, it's, I always have a part, just assume I always have a part. Okay, my part is I raised my voice, I didn't text, I was silent, I shut down, and there was impact over there. That tells me I'm able to think about myself, and I can think about you, which is, it's a relationship. So I have to think about my teammate. I cannot just think about myself. You're playing a new game. If you don't want to do any of this stuff, do not be in a long-term relationship. Stay single and just go live your life, and that's fine. But being a team requires a tremendous amount of maturity, and any of these skills will get you there if you commit to them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And realizing once you make that commitment, you are in that relationship. And like you're saying, you absolutely have some sort of responsibility. And there's this common thing I experience in my marriage. And I'm on my way to maturity, hopefully, but I'm also trained in doing this as a living. And yet I still often find this dynamic where my wife is constantly giving me feedback and she says, "Hey, if you have feedback for me, let me know." But I find, and I don't know if it's conditioned or what, but she has this really uncanny ability to be aware of where I'm coming from or where I missed the mark and give me that feedback. And I often find I'm I am the one apologizing, which to your point, I shouldn't see as negative. I think that's good. But I find a lot of guys are in this dynamic where they receive a lot of feedback. You know, there's this funny Bill Burr, he's a comedian. He has this little bit where essentially he says, you know, oh, in my marriage, like my wife's in this glass museum case and I can't touch her, you know, like there's no feedback. And I'm the one always apologizing, of course. And I'm just, yeah, wondering what you may say to me or another guy who feels like, gosh, am I the only one here that has stuff to work on? And how can I not shy away? Because regardless, it's true. I do have stuff to work on. And what may be helpful for me to sharpen my skills on healthfully and helpfully giving my partner feedback in a way that maybe I haven't been up to this point.
Yeah, I struggle with the same thing. So I'm with you on this one. My wife has way more feedback for me than I have for her. So you're not alone there. And we've been, we're on 22 years now and the feedback keeps coming. And I'm grateful for it the vast majority of the time. I do get defensive at times, but most of the time I'm pretty receptive because it helps me be a better husband, right? And a better father and a better human. And I do think women got less gnarly conditioning from a young age as guys did. So I do think women are a little farther along here and actually need less feedback. That's not always true, of course. There's exceptions, but our egos and our conditioning and how we got raised is not that conducive to a long-term relationship because we're so self-focused and we need a lot of reminders to be relationship focused and to stop thinking about ourselves so much and think about them. And, there's a lot. So I just think there's an equity that I think is just here that's part of the patriarchal machine. And I just think it exists. So I like to try to name that. But again, inside any relationship, you want to have agreements that it's okay to give both people feedback. And if it feels unfair, you can certainly speak up. Like, it feels like this is out of balance, or I'm getting a lot of feedback and you're getting none. But like, I'm kind of like you in that I don't have a ton of feedback for my wife. I'm not trying to ask her to be different. I think she does a lot of things inside of our marriage really well. When I do give her feedback, it's often about parenting something. She's an exquisite parent, but occasionally she'll do things and she forgot to check in with me. And I'm like, hey, that didn't feel good. I thought we were a team here. And she's like, oh, right, shit. And so I can give her that type of feedback, right? And, I think that's just okay. I wouldn't necessarily make that a problem. If you're like me in that it's hard to find something, but I'm able to judge. I can judge and find fault with her, no problem. I'm really good at that. But that's not feedback, right? And I don't take my judgments that seriously. If I'm judging something about her, like let's just say I used to judge her a lot because she was late. I'm always on time. She's always late, right? And I would just judge the shit out of her. And then I finally realized, you know what? This is just how she is. Like, why am I getting all worked up about this? This is a waste of fucking time for me to try to make her different here. So that's more how I'm working with my quote feedback for her is they're often judgments. And I'm trying to work with my judgments in a more accepting way. One more thing is if it starts to turn into a resentment, like let's say you started to resent your wife about something, that's when it's time to speak up.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that last piece because unfortunately it has happened. Also, my wife is historically late, also leaves little trinkets around the house and never closes the cabinets, all these things. And, I'll never forget reading the David Dita book, Way of the Superior Man. And in that, he says, instead of getting frustrated because you wish she was different, why don't you just be thankful by accepting like who she is? And I think that points to the really astute insight you just gave us, which is like there's a difference in judgment and feedback. Judgment essentially says there's something wrong with you, but I'm not going to enter into a dialogue on how you can change that. I'm just going to solidify my interpretation of who you are in light of that action that you're doing. And I'm removed from it. Versus the feedback says, here's something I'm seeing. I know this isn't who you are, but it's something you're doing. I'm here with you and supporting you as you essentially don't repeat this behavior that is ultimately not a reflection of who you are. And yeah, I just think that's really helpful. So thank you for speaking to that, especially the resentment part, because as hard as it is to be honest, like, oh, really, I resent the person that I love most. It's like, yeah, it's kind of actually normal. And like, but to your point, is not acceptable. And you have to find the wherewithal within yourself to confront. So the last question I'd like to end with here is, you worked with thousands of people over 20 years. I'm curious what's changed on how men have struggled with relationships then when you started versus present day. And maybe, what's gotten harder as well as maybe what gives you hope.
I think two things have happened in the last 20 years in my observation. One is I think more and more men are coming into personal growth work through whether it's entrepreneurship or hearing, Tim Ferriss talk about how to be more self-aware or something. Like there's a hipness and a more coolness to personal growth. And I see that, and I think some of the men's organizations have grown as a result, like men's work. Not everybody's drawn to that kind of men's work stuff, but whether a man does that or not, he might be a voracious podcast listener and read a lot of books and try to become a stronger, better person, right? I think that's increased. While simultaneously, the polarization around the messages men are getting, especially in the last 5 years, are increasing. So if we call it between like a more kind of left leaning, open minded, open hearted dude and a right wing militia kind of oriented guy, there's a real difference in how to be a man. I think that polarization, and that's not that's just what's happened, right? Whether we can find all kinds of causes. But so I do think there's even stronger messages about how we, quote, should be a man right now than ever before that are just so loud. And it's disheartening to me, the more closed-hearted approach, which is othering everybody and saying you're right and I'm wrong and I'm better than you. I just that type of manhood doesn't appeal at all to me and the son I'm raising, but it's out there and it's strong.
Yeah, that's well said. And I couldn't agree more. It's interesting with a young guy out there who is either not seeing the value of getting into a relationship or getting into a relationship and terrified of conflict and it not working out, which I also see avoiding getting into a relationship as a form of conflict with yourself and obviously the initial connection that you'd have with someone. What would you say to a guy who needs to change his understanding of conflict from the start of asking someone out to the process of dating someone and assessing the viability in lifelong partnership, and then ultimately, the conflict that continually happens within a committed relationship?
Yeah, just start seeing conflict as fuel, as all a growth opportunity. And when you set it up that way, you can't lose because you're always learning. You might lose a relationship, but you don't lose the learning ever if you're staying in a growth learning mindset. So, conflict, the strongest relationships and teams are built through conflict, in my opinion, not the absence of conflict. It's the thing that, like, if we're going to secure a foundation of a home and fortify it like a relational home, you want to have adversity because it makes you more resilient through all the storms, right? It's the same with parenting children. We want our kids to be able to handle hard things, difficult things, uncomfortable things, because they're going to do better in life than everybody else who is running from hard things. So you don't want to be one of those people running from hard things. Embrace the hard, embrace the suck, embrace the effort and the discomfort, because it's ultimately good for your being. And if it's done well with a partner and they're respectful about it, it's going to make you guys an awesome team.
Yes. Wise words and good ones to end on. And I'm curious where people can find your work and what you're up to.
Yeah, at Jayson Gaddis on Instagram. That's Jason with a Y. Or relationshipschool.com is another place where we have a podcast and courses and all the things.
We'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. And yeah, thank you for your wisdom and insight and sharing your experience and now being generative and helping people, and especially in my eyes, men learn how to show up in relationships and handle conflict in a different way.
You got it, Wes. Thanks for what you're doing.